Welcome back to Rules of Engagement. We just talked a little bit about a pretty cool Terran strategy about massing orbital commands and how it can be very strong, but perhaps Major didn't really maximize the advantage he got from it when he played against Scarlet there, which ultimately led to his defeat later on in the game. Now let's talk about a Zerg vs. Protoss game many of you guys may have remembered from the MLG Dallas Fall Championships, Leenock vs. Rain, a game many thought Leenock had lost. We'll talk about how earlier in the game he uses some pretty cool roach harassment and how that can be kind of, we don't see it too often, the strengths and weaknesses of it. So a couple things to keep in mind as we talk about the roach harassment are going to be, what are the strengths and weaknesses of roaches as a general unit? And then taking those strengths and weaknesses into consideration, why do we not see roach harassment very often? Because at the pro level, it's pretty rare against Protoss. And then what worked and didn't work for Leenock in this game with his roach usage. So let's jump right into the game here. Leenock versus Rain. And let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of roaches. We can see already, he's planning roach harassment, getting drop tech, massing up a ton of roaches, relatively low economy, 67 drones is pretty low for Zerg. He lost his third to a DTs, but then he killed the DTs, so let's say it bounced out. But anyway, he's going to standard 3-bait roach pressure, but instead of maxing very fast, he's maxing a little bit later, but getting a lot of tech behind it. Also, he's maxing later because, of course, his third was killed. So, the strengths and weaknesses of roaches is the most important thing. If you ever want to talk about how to use the unit in certain situations, first you have to figure out the strengths and weaknesses of the unit in general. So, if you just look at stats, roaches are cost-efficient versus every ground unit Protoss has. Just compare their stats and their costs and look at their damage per cost, life per cost. If you just all throw them in a giant pit together, they're cost-efficient versus every Protoss unit. This includes Immortals. This includes every Protoss ground unit. This includes Colossi. It includes Stalkers. They beat everything just by the stats. And they can be made quickly and easily. But now let's talk about some of their weaknesses. So, roaches lose effectiveness as the army size goes up, right? As you get bigger and bigger armies, they lose effectiveness, and this is due to Blink and Force Field. As roaches will beat Stalkers. And they'll even be Blink Stalkers if the numbers are relatively small and they have the speed upgrade, which they should by the time Protoss gets Blink. But if there's enough Stalkers so that when the front row blinks back, by the time the roaches have gone to that row again, they already have another Blink cooldown up. Once the Stalkers get that big, then they start pinning roaches because Blink gets more and more effective the more units you get. Also, Force Field becomes more and more effective as the armies scale up because you can cut off larger swaths of the army. You're going to be fighting through choke points where Force Fields are stronger. It's just more and more effective as armies scale up. So, roaches lose effectiveness as army sizes get bigger. And roaches are limited by supply. So, they're basically good in smaller, scrappy battles. They're weaker in these large galactic death ball battles. So, why don't we see roach harassment very often? Well, because we just talked about how roaches are strongest when army size are limited, roaches are mostly used to execute timings or prevent timings, because in those situations, it's going to be a smaller unit count and the supply won't be as big a consideration. Deathfall situations, they're bad. They're only good in timings or prevent timings, so a lot of people don't want to get these units and harass with them when they know that even if they do a good job harassing, they keep the units alive, the units are going to be worth very little as the game goes on. So that's why we don't see harassment very often. So as we go through this game, you can see Leenock's trying something different. He's not just massing roaches and bearing down the front door, or doing a massive doom drop to get past the front door and then fighting there with the mass roaches. What he's doing is he's splitting up his army. He's got some roaches distracting Rain from the front, and the others, he's going to plan to drop with these overlords. We're going to rally more forces from pretty much everywhere. He's going to drop them with these overlords. Unfortunately, this little guy sees all the overlords. That's pretty unlucky for Leenock. But he doesn't know that. And his plan is to grab all these units that are mustering up here, drop them in the overlords, and then use them to harass multiple angles because he's going to continue harassing the front from here and then harass from the back with a drop plate. So that's what Leenock's plan is. But unfortunately for him, what didn't go well so well for Leenock is that this harassment doesn't go well. And it doesn't go well because the Dark Templar spotted these overlords on the way and knew exactly what was going on. As you can see here, Hero's already mustering up a little army here. He's already warping more Stalkers. And when it comes time for Leenock to go for this drop play, there's too many Stalkers waiting for him. And this entire force gets absolutely mauled with doing almost no damage. And because this did no damage, now all of a sudden Rain feels free to make the jump on this army and just blink on top of it and finish this army off, training very strongly as well. Looking at units lost. Rain came out ahead there, and keep in mind that Rain had already lost several DTs early in the game. He was behind by 1,000, and all of a sudden he's ahead by a lot. So we can say it's safe to say, Leanox again trading forward here just from inferior numbers. We can say it's safe to say the harassment did not trade well because it was scouted and it was defended. So that didn't work out too well. But here's what did work out well. The harassment moved the game into a very action-packed direction, right? Rain's been attacking all the all the roaches. Now Rain's moving out and going on the offense. So Rain's way ahead, right? He's 11 food ahead. Looking at the tech, Leanox just finishing his infestation pit. The economies are even, but Protoss has an army that's like 3 times bigger. I mean, the foods look the same, or foods look similar, but remember, this is Stalkers versus Roaches. Stalkers are about twice the cost per supply, not to mention that much of the Zerg supplies and units that aren't in the army yet. So if you look at this, this is like 7,000 resources versus 3,300, about twice the army value. Rain has twice the army value, the same economy, greater tech, blink and +2 weapons versus just one, or actually better upgrades for the Zerg, but still better tech for the Protoss, bigger army, equal economy. This game hasn't gone well for Leanox, except that it's moved the game in a very action-oriented direction. And remember, I said roaches are strongest when you're not into huge death balls, and when there's not force fields or like an infinite number of stalkers. Right? It's pretty hard to be infinite number of anything, but especially as the units get larger, roaches start to get weaker and weaker. But even though Leanox's army is much smaller, this is where roaches are amazing. So this is almost like the mind games part of his harassment. Like, yeah, I'll go and I'll attack you. Either my harassment will work and I'll get ahead in the game, or my harassment will fail miserably. You'll be light years ahead, but it's going to force the game into an action-packed type of situation where all of a sudden my roaches are strong again. So I win no matter what. That could be what Leanox's thinking. Like, this is a situation where, yeah, I'm losing, but all of a sudden the roaches get extremely cost-efficient in this type of pitch battle on creep as more and more rally in here. So it was action-packed enough. This game is this back and forth. We can see. Let's actually just watch the game for a few minutes here. Leanox microing the roaches. The stalkers are coming in there. And he's lifting off, picking up a couple stalkers at a time. Doing some decent damage here. And he eventually forces Rain out. As the game goes on, they both continue to macro up. Rain takes a 4th, adds in Immortals, adds in Observers so he can see the burrowed roaches, and he moves out again. So we can tell that the game is a very action-packed. And so because the players are continually moving out and initiating conflicts over here, I mentioned how when it gets to a death ball, roaches are weak. But the way this game's going, it's never going to get to the death ball stage because look at this. This isn't a death ball. This is a very strong army. Don't get me wrong. But there's not enough force fields. There's not the colossi or massive immortal quantities to make it really a death ball. And in a non-death ball situation, these roaches are actually going to do pretty well here. I mean, they're going to have to get down this ramp first, but they can use Burrow Moon if they want to. Meanwhile, he's got Infestors to back them up to help nullify the Blink. That's very, very important. Add in Infestors to nullify the Blink. And look at this. See how he fungled Observer? He noticed Observer is there. He fungles it again. And the instant that Observer dies, he burrows. And now all of a sudden, Rain can't go on top of those roaches. They'll pop him and kill him. And when Rain tries to run away, they can utilize Burrow again and keep picking off and regenerating, And this is when roaches get very, very effective is in a scrappy game. So let's talk a little bit about how that game went. The game goes on for another several minutes, and one of the players wins. It ends up being Leanox, probably one of the biggest comebacks of all time in that game. But the cool thing there is that he had this harassment plan, and it failed horribly. But because it failed, it guided the game into this weird situation where all of a sudden the roaches were really powerful again. It was like some crazy Leanox mind game plan there. Of course, one could sit back there and say, you know what? In that situation, if Rain just went double robo and played defensive and turtle up and made, you know, a bunch of colossi, then as the game goes forward, Leanox would be in a really tough position. And you know what? That's true. But when you're being attacked and your opponent loses all their army, you kind of think, okay, I should go and do some damage now before they can re-macro up another army, and then it's army versus army, and who knows what happens. So, I mean, Rain made a choice there, and it's always, you know, when you look back, it's obvious that he should have played defensively, but in a time, it's a perfectly logical assumption to go there attack. And so using roaches as a harassment tool can be kind of good if you can provoke your opponent to attack. Of course, we don't see that type of play very often. That's why it's featured on Mechanics of the Bazaar, is because it isn't very common. We only saw Lenok do it that one game, and looking back at that game, Lenok probably thought, you know what? I got a little bit lucky that Rain didn't react in the correct manner to my roach harassment. I mean, he defended it perfectly. Rain's defense was superb. But then the way he played the game out from there on wasn't in the most ideal manner, and maybe I shouldn't use this strategy very often because other people are going to be more ready for it. They're going to know to play a more turtle style against it. So this strategy was fun to watch, and it looked really cool, but I don't think we're going to see it very often in pro-level games. Maybe on certain maps that would play well to it, but definitely not on a standard map pool we use right now. That's it for this section. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with a question and answer period.